Welcome, Wargamers, to the war-torn lands of Ea, because today we are continuing our discussion on the Exile campaign. This is part 2 of its coverage, and we're really going to start to move the plot along here, because last time we introduced the idea of the Exile campaign, which refers to a chapter in the history of Ea, instead of like a singular military campaign. And it was just a lot of various forces looking around and deciding that attacking the Spires is better than falling to internal arguments. The Dominion launched a religious crusade, the Dweghome clans tried to put their own enmity towards one another aside from the memory wars and unite over a new enemy. The Spires themselves are taken aback that such lesser life forms are interrupting their research, find themselves wrong-footed, and erupting in wars that they were not expecting to have to deal with on their doorstep. And so today we're going to continue that story right where we left off. But before I do that, I want to say, if you are interested in anything from Bellum or any hobby supplies, please consider using one of my Linktree links in the description down below. There you'll find a nice chunky discount to Bellum's store, and every single time you use any of the links from that Linktree, you'll see how much money you save, and it goes directly to supporting me, my wife, our cats, the whole channel, and I could not be more grateful for any of you. It's life-changing stuff, and I appreciate every bit of it. And I'd also like to throw out a shout-out to Goonhammer. This is an awesome blog online, and they're trying to jumpstart their Conquest content. So I have like a lot of new player tips, tactics, that kind of stuff. Just good discussion. So go support them, keep the community growing, and go check out Goonhammer. Now, we've already talked about the Exile campaign being broken into two fronts, the North and the South. And the lore that we have in this book really focuses on the southern end of the conflict. It's worth taking a moment here to clarify that not all the major players in this story, meaning the Spire, the Dweghome, the Dominion, Weavers, and the Wadroon, are not necessarily unified in purpose. We talked about the division being a central reason for these attacks to launch in the first place. But that's not the same as a consistent internal disintegration. For example, the book lists 3 different military campaign leaders for the Dominion. One is the actual Holy Crusade, initially led by General Massilius. One is a band of Dominion rebels whose sole contribution is just causing as much chaos for the Dominion, and how that has a domino effect into all the other events that deal with all the other factions. So to call these things both quote-unquote Dominion armies is a kind of a misnomer. For example, there's 3 Dweghome clans in this southern campaign, and they are all decidedly less cooperative than their northern counterparts, and they openly clash multiple times with huge ramifications for how this goes down. The Spires themselves are full of cutthroat scientists and political leaders looking to capitalize on this period of destabilization. So maybe they're not reinforcing each other just to see if they can knock off a competitor. Or they're making internal alliances or stuff like that. And individually, these little schisms don't matter, but as they come together, we have a madhouse full of armies against literally everyone around them, same faction that we would play as or not. It's just a lot going on. A perfect example of this, and honestly a great way that this story kind of introduces itself through one of these factions, is what's going on in the Dominion. As we said, it's a crumbling empire at this point. We're within the 100-year mark of its fall, and folks are already leaving to go found the city-states and the 100 kingdoms and stuff like that. But the political leaders think a religious crusade will turn things around, give the populace something to root for, and it acts as a simple way to get rid of your dissidents. You conscript them. This army of warriors, heroes, common rabble, and penal legions collectively is known as the Solsti. And as we said, led by General Massilius. And his goal, Massilius, the target of the missile that his crusade is headed for is known as Spire Abhorreth. A sky-piercingly tall spire where a lot of research and military power is concentrated. It's their nearest neighbor at the Dominion, and he wants it gone. And so he starts making his way there, and along the Crusade's pathway to Abhorreth, 2 important things start happening, some good, some bad. The good thing is, they start knocking out Weaver courts like crazy. These are the exiles of the Weaver Courts, who didn't want to live in the giant fortified spires. They have much smaller, less defended groups that kind of live in little clans or enclaves, and their thing is they fight a bit and then they retreat, like guerrilla warfare style. They just, if you're trying to think of a broad idea of what the Weaver Courts are, think Wood Elves meets Spire in terms of aesthetics, but that's basically what we're thinking of. Hit and run, lightning tactics, ambushes, that kind of stuff. Not ready to deal with a whole Holy Crusade marching in iron arms straight through them. But Massilius is pushing aliens out of here, which is a good thing, right? I mean, that's the whole point of the Crusade. In fact, he does such a good job that it almost can kind of give you a false sense of accomplishment. His soldiers might make the mistake of thinking all the fights against the exiles will be this easy. The bad part of what's going on is that right behind Massilius's giant Holy Crusade is an army of rebels, hell-bent on leaving Massilius out to the wolves. Now, I'm trying to highlight what parts of the story I think are the most important and kind of keep things moving. The rebellion within the Dominion is interesting, because at one point it was very unorganized, right? There was just kind of whispers of like, I don't like how things are, and you would have that normal kind of dissent that you might hear from any falling empire. Then at one point, the Dominion disbanded their knightly orders and forced all of these highly disciplined and educated warriors into slavery. They didn't want to have to compete with heroes or anything like that. They wanted the religious arm to be the complete and utter control of the Dominion. And while initially, that sounded like a win, right? You solidify your power base. It had the knock-on effect of putting highly dangerous and organized warriors into the crowds of the disenfranchised, who they then turned into a pseudo-army, nothing like the full regiments of the Dominion, like, fully armed with artillery and all this nothing like that, nothing big. They know they cannot take on the full Crusade army, and so their plan, as rebels, is just to lock it outside and let the wolves kill it, right? Massilius wants to go on this big Holy Crusade. All you have to do is close all the doors of supply behind him, and he's going to be all alone. And we don't need to beat that huge old Dominion army. We'll just let him die. This particular rebellion is led by Jul Kentonus. And as Massilius's army moves closer and closer to their goal, Eporeth, Keltonus is cutting off all his supply lines, all of his communication. At this point, the Crusade is headed towards a massive war, but they're doing so very much alone. Now, because of all this going on, Massilius pauses right at the gates of Eporeth, like in the last settlement of the Dominion before the big march to go fight the Spire. He stops there to figure out what's happening. And he lets, scouts go out and make a plan for things. And they're hanging out here for a bit. And this is when two events really begin to kick off into high gear. Firstly, they see, the scouts meaning, they see a Dweghome clan marching to war in strength for the first time. And they're headed exactly where they are, Eporeth. So immediately, the forces of the Dominion are getting a glimpse that things are escalating. The other is that Eporeth, the other thing that's going on is that Eporeth is pushing its boundaries outward. The leaders of the Spire are getting more concerned that the local fauna might interrupt their work. Their work, if you don't know, is a completely synthetic organism intended to act as a servant and warrior caste for the Spire, which will later be called the Wadroon. And so, the leaders, the high-minded, individuals of the Spire, start by, I'm going to put in quotes here, clarifying their borders. Huge patrols of Spire vat-grown armies. They start setting fires to mark territory, destroying settlements that have slowly kind of encroached upon their lands. Again, drawing the line in the sand to make everything clear. And so Massilius is sitting in this town, kind of concentrating his forces, resupplying, trying to figure out what's going on behind him. And he's watching these two otherworldly armies, Dweghome marching out in a way that you've never seen before or has ever been recorded. And then you have the Spire who are slash and burning everything in a sphere around them just to mark their territory, right? Just to pee on the ground and mark it for themselves. And so this is where the human armies stand as this powder keg is primed to blow. But like I said, they froze when an ungodly amount of Dweghome marched right out in front of them. And it's here in our story that I want to pause, and we're going to kind of shift our perspective. We've been kind of Dominion focused here now, but now we're going to pick up our eyes and we're going to recenter our point of view on the Dweghome. Because this is really when these factions meet. So how we immediately got here and what their goals are is very important. There are 3 Dweghome holds in play, and how they play off of each other is super important and very cool. Hagdom is the first hold to come up from the ground. They immediately start wiping out the Weaver Courts that had sprung up on their land, and the point here is not just to kill exiles, although that is part of the Mamancer's orders. The Reg here that's leading this is super clever, and he has quite a plan indeed. He hits the exiles from a singular direction. There's some brutal attacks, but the idea is he's trying to push the Weaver Courts eastward, right into the path of, I guess, his neighbor and supposed ally, another hold that's busting out of their kind of underground lair. And what he wants to do is slow down his neighbors. The leader of this army, Hagdom, is a rake named Ghraib. That's gonna be how I pronounce it the entire time. It's probably wrong. But the idea basically is that Ghraib wants to push the exiles to slow down his neighbors so that he can then go out and knock out these spires on his own, get all the glory, all the credit, and establish his hold as being superior in all future, memory war negotiations going forward. So he's not just taking out the Weaver Courts, but he's doing so in a way that pushes them into his neighbor, and he is also making a beeline up to Abhorreth, just like the Dominion was. Right, this is where that kind of meetup happens. And it's here that our Dominion leader, Massilius, has an idea. What if we could use the Dweghome to fight the Spire at Abhorreth for us? Right, we'll do the thing that every, hero in every war game does, which is you let your army kill everything off, and then the hero comes in for style points and just kills the last guy. That's basically what he wants to have happen. Let the Dweghome, this army that seems so ungodly in its sheer scope, size, and intensity, let them crash upon the Spire, and then once they've worn each other out, we'll come in, and we can dictate who wins and who loses. So Massilius stealthily moves his forces off to one side, and he sees the Dweghome on his right. The Spire armies leave their Spire and come, into the field of battle, and Massilius comes in between them and the Spire itself, meaning he cuts them off. They're now surrounded. They have Dweghome in front of them and Dominion to the behind them. The event that's shaping up here is the first chapter of the Exile campaign. It's known as the Battle of Three. Dweghome, Dominion, and Spire forces all meet at once in strength. It's brutal. Lots of deaths happen, and the Spire were taken totally off guard and basically had to split their forces into a rearguard action, and then the bulk of the army tried to retreat back to the safety of the labs. They threw a bunch of drones that don't matter into the Dweghome to satiate their bloodlust, and the more precious stuff basically fought the Dominion forces to make it back home. The battle ended with the Spire being defeated, and Massilius was hoping that after helping them fight the Spire, the Dweghome would at least pause to chat. Right? Maybe he could kind of use some guile and cunning to get them to do what he wanted. But no. The Dweghome threw an enemy into their neighbor just to slow them down. You think they want to share an ounce of glory with something as little to them as a human? No. And so this Dweghome leader immediately attacks the Dominion, right? They just beat the Spire. The Spire are running away. Then they look over to the left and they see a bunch of humans like, friends? And they're like, no, bro. In this second conflict that happens now between Dweghome and Dominion, General Massilius is killed in action, and the Dominion army retreats back to its city stronghold. And like we said, not long after, the Spire basically do the same. They fall back to Spire Abhorreth and start refortifying and refitting their armies. Now I want to pause here in our story for the end of this video and describe why is this section so cool. Well, the battle here we talked about, the Battles of Three, really defines the first stage of the campaign. Each of these forces individually is looking to make an edge against their enemies and also their allies. We see the short-sighted decisions in leadership of the Dominion, leaving supply lines to the rebels, thinking you can use the Dweghome, and that's going to continue to be a theme, their own incompetence, if you will. While Ghraib certainly has the winning start to this campaign. He's moved very aggressively and left his flanks open as a result of it. And remind you, these flanks are sort of guarded by his not-so-trusted allies, the other holds, so we're going to see how that pans out here pretty soon. Now, these things are important for explaining why same factions will fight, right? It's easy to think of factions as all-encompassing unified things because we do this in history, right? Like, for example, if you crack open a history book, it might say something like, the Entente forces were surprised by the enormity of the Central Powers' army moving through Belgium or something like that, cut to World War I. There's French leaders screaming warnings that this is coming. British troops rush up and then are supposedly left in the lurch as the French retreat. And my point in saying all of that, even though it sounds like a random whatever, is that there's drama even among unified things. The dry way you read stuff in a history book overlooks the fact that this is individual tragedies and dramas playing out all the time. The drama between the different hold regs here, and one of the leaders is a steel shaper instead of a reg for the Dweghom clans, is its own force on the battlefield. You can't really just say the Dweghom forces because they're not unified in that way. And anything you do say that sums them up will always have exceptions, like we mentioned before, like with the French generals who knew something was coming even though collectively maybe there was a surprise. Confusion, egos, miscommunication, money, financial capital, that kind of stuff. And all of those trends and forces play into an individual army. So yeah, spires are fighting each other. So do holds and dominions and so on. And what I appreciate here is the context to facilitate some of those matchups. So we don't just keep, looking at each other and going, must be training day, as we both play Space Marines for the 1000th time. It's good storytelling, it's good writing, and I deeply appreciate it. I'd love to hear your thoughts as we continue this series. I think you're going to enjoy the Exile campaign. I really like the way it concluded, and I hope you'll stick along with me for the whole thing. So thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming!